Okay, so let's be real for a second. Nobody gets excited about paperwork, right?
Yeah.
But when you're dealing with importing or exporting, especially to a place like Vietnam, getting those documents right, it can really make or break your entire shipment. It's the difference between a smooth process and a total logistical nightmare. I think we've all been there at some point, right?
Yeah.
Staring at a screen, just forms and more forms, wondering, like, where do I even begin?
Oh, absolutely. It can be super overwhelming, especially if you're a business and you're like trying to enter the Vietnamese market for the first time. And that's exactly why we're doing this deep dive today. We're going to be breaking down the 7 essential documents that you need for logistics legalities in Vietnam. Think of it as your like cheat sheet, your shortcut to navigating this whole paperwork jungle.
I love that, a cheat sheet. So that's what we're doing today. We're going to help you guys breathe through customs, avoid those, dreaded delays, and just most importantly, keep your goods flowing smoothly.
Exactly. We'll go through each document step by step, not just what they are, but, why they matter, what you need to watch out for. Trust me, understanding all these little nuances, it can save you a ton of headaches later on, and potentially a lot of money too.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's jump right in. First document on the list, the commercial invoice. Now I know what you're thinking. Isn't that just a bill?
Mm.
But in the world of international trade, it's so much more than that.
Yeah, it's like think of the commercial invoice like your shipment's passport. It's the document that the Vietnamese customs officials use to determine, what are the duties, what are the taxes that you're going to have to pay. And just like a passport, any mistake, any inconsistency can cause big problems.
Right. Yeah, you don't want to mess around with this one. So we're talking about like detailed product descriptions, accurate pricing, correct Inca terms. Everything needs to be perfect.
Spot on, yeah. And speaking of Inca terms, that's one area where I see, people often trip up. Make sure those Inca terms that you're using are super clearly stated on that document and that they actually reflect what your agreement is, whether it's with the buyer or the seller, because using the wrong Inca term, that can lead to a lot of unexpected responsibilities
Yeah.
and costs.
Yeah, for sure. It's like showing up at the airport with a passport that says you're going to Paris
Yeah.
when you actually booked a flight to Rome, right? Not going to end well.
Exactly, exactly. So just double check, triple check every single detail on that commercial invoice. Make sure everything aligns with all of your contracts, all of your agreements, and you'll be off to a great start.
Perfect. Okay. So next up, we've got the bill of lading, or BL.
Mm.
So if the commercial invoice is like the passport, then the bill of lading is like the boarding pass, right?
Right.
Proving that your goods are actually en route to Vietnam.
Yeah, that's a great way to think about it. And it's issued by the carrier, serves as basically the contract of carriage. It outlines the terms of the transportation and confirms that, okay, the goods have been received and they're ready for shipment.
Okay, so like choosing your seat on the plane, you've got window or aisle. You've also got different types of bills of lading, right? You've got negotiable and non-negotiable.
Right. And which one you choose really comes down to the specifics of, what are you actually doing with this transaction. So if you're selling goods, like while they're still in transit, a negotiable bill of lading that allows you to actually transfer ownership just by endorsing that document. It's like almost like a blank check for the goods.
Interesting. Okay, so negotiable, more flexibility,
Hmm.
maybe the buyer changes during the process or whatever. But what about non-negotiable?
Non-negotiable is, I guess you could say more straightforward. It designates a specific consignee, and they're the only ones who are authorized to receive those goods. So this is more common when, okay, the buyer is already determined. No need to change ownership while it's in transit.
Okay, got it. So pick the right seat for your cargo. Make sure you choose the type of bill of lading that makes sense for your transaction. Awesome. So moving right along, document number 3, certificate of origin. This one is all about where your products were made.
Exactly. The certificate of origin, it basically proves the origin of your goods, which is super important for figuring out, okay, what are the tariffs and can you take advantage of any preferential trade agreements?
And Vietnam has a lot of free trade agreements, right? Like the CPTPP, EVFTA, things like that. And those can offer like reduced or even zero tariffs on goods from certain countries.
Yeah, absolutely. So that can be a huge cost saving. But in order to unlock those benefits, your goods need to meet the specific rules of origin that are outlined in those agreements. So, for example, if you're exporting textiles to Vietnam under the EVFTA, you need to show what's called double transformation, which means that the yarn and the fabric production all has to happen within either Vietnam or the EU.
So it's not enough to just like slap a made in label on your product, right? You have to actually prove it.
Yeah, you need evidence, and the certificate of origin is that proof. This document is usually issued by like the Chamber of Commerce or another kind of official body in your country of origin, and it just verifies that, yep, this product meets the rules of origin, so you qualify for that special treatment.
Awesome. All right. Moving on to document number 4, the packing list. Now, this one might sound pretty self-explanatory, but there are some important details to keep in mind.
Yeah, it's essentially a very detailed inventory of everything that's in your shipment. Customs officials are going to use this to verify the contents of your shipment against the commercial invoice.
Got it. So it's like the manifest for your cargo, customs knows exactly what's in each box or container.
Exactly. And just like with the commercial invoice, accuracy here is key. You want to include the quantity, the weight, the dimensions of each item, and make sure that those descriptions actually match up with what's on the commercial invoice.
Yeah, any discrepancy, I imagine, would throw some red flags. Could lead to delays, inspections, all that fun stuff.
Absolutely. Imagine you order a bookshelf online and the box arrives with just like a bunch of loose screws and planks.
Yeah.
It wouldn't give you a lot of confidence, would it?
No, not at all.
It's the same thing with customs. They need to be sure that what you're declaring is actually what's being shipped.
Makes sense. Okay, so clear descriptions, no technical jargon, double-check everything against the commercial invoice. That's the recipe for smooth customs clearance.
Exactly.
Perfect. All right, now let's talk about document number 5, the import-export license. Now, this one isn't required for every single shipment, but it's super important for certain regulated products. Yeah. So can you give us some examples of what kind of products we're talking about here?
Sure. So we're talking about anything that Vietnam kind of wants to control more closely, whether it's for safety reasons, security, or even economic reasons. So some examples would be electronics, chemicals, pharmaceuticals, and certain agricultural products.
Okay, so if you're dealing with any of those types of products, you basically need permission from the Vietnamese government to bring them in or out of the country.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it. And the actual process for obtaining this license, it can vary quite a bit depending on the specific product and which ministry or agency is involved. But generally, you're going to need to submit an application with detailed information about the goods, the importer or exporter, and the purpose of the shipment.
Sounds like having a good local partner or an agent who knows the ropes could be really helpful here.
Oh, absolutely. A reliable partner can really help you avoid those like costly mistakes and make sure that your application actually gets approved. Because trying to navigate that licensing process on your own, it can be like trying to assemble IKEA furniture without the instructions.
Right. Super frustrating and could end badly.
Exactly.
Okay, so the key takeaway there, do your research early on. Understand the specific licensing requirements for your product. And if you're in doubt, talk to an expert. All right, moving on to document number 6, the customs declaration.
This is where you officially declare your goods to Vietnamese customs. It's a super detailed document, lays out everything they need to know, assess the duties and taxes, make sure you're complying with regulations, all that, and ultimately to clear your goods for entry.
Okay, so it's like filling out an arrival card, but for your shipment, right? Yeah. Make sure Vietnam has all the info they need.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. So the customs declaration, it includes stuff like the value of your goods, how they're classified in terms of tariffs, the mode of transport you're using, the port of entry, and a whole bunch of other details customs wants to know.
And thankfully, Vietnam has a pretty advanced e-customs system now, right?
Yeah.
That's got to make this whole process way smoother than it used to be.
Oh, definitely. The e-customs system has sped things up significantly, but even with that, accuracy is still absolutely key. Any errors, anything missing on that customs declaration, and, well, you're looking at potential delays, penalties, even rejection of your entire shipment.
So still got to be on top of things, double-checking everything's accurate and complete.
100%. And honestly, this is another area where a reliable logistics partner can be a real lifesaver. They can help you navigate that whole e-customs system, make sure all the I's are dotted, costs crossed, and avoid any potential hiccups along the way.
It's like having a travel agent who's a total pro, knows all the visa rules, customs regulations, everything. Just takes so much stress off your shoulders.
Exactly right. Now, before we jump to the last document, I want to circle back to the certificate of origin for a sec. We talked about how crucial it is for taking advantage of those trade agreements, but there's one more point I got to emphasize.
Okay, lay it on me. What's the catch?
Well, those rules of origin, they can get pretty complicated, and they vary a lot between different agreements. So, bottom line, do your research. Know the specific requirements for your product and the agreement you're trying to use. Don't just assume your goods qualify automatically.
So you're saying something that might qualify under one agreement might not under another.
That's exactly it. Each agreement has its own unique set of criteria. Gotta understand those nuances. Otherwise, you could end up hit with tariffs you weren't expecting, or even penalties.
It's like trying to use a coupon at a store that doesn't accept it. You think you're getting a deal, but then, bam, full price.
Perfect analogy.
Yeah.
So, before you even ship anything, do your homework on those rules of origin. Trust me, it'll save you a ton of headaches and money in the long run.
Awesome advice. Okay, let's move on to document number 7, the final one on our list. Quarantine or health certificates. Now, these might not apply to every shipment, but when they do, they're a must-have.
Right. These certificates are specifically for anything that could pose a risk to public health or to the environment. So we're talking food, plants, animals, anything derived from those.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So it's all about Vietnam making sure what's coming in is safe, meets their standards.
Exactly. So these certificates, they're issued by the relevant authorities in the exporting country. They certify that the goods have been inspected and they're good to go according to Vietnam's requirements.
And I imagine if you don't have these certificates, things could go south pretty quickly.
You got it. Without those quarantine or health certificates, your shipment could be refused entry. You're looking at fines, delays, even destruction of your goods in some cases.
So definitely not worth skimping on this one. If you need them, get them sorted before you ship.
Absolutely. And another thing to remember is that the specific requirements for these certificates, they can vary a lot. It depends on the product, where it's coming from, all sorts of factors. Again, research is your best friend.
It's like packing for a trip, right?
Right.
You got to check visa requirements, if there are any vaccinations you need, specific customs rules for that country. Otherwise, you could run into trouble at the border.
Exactly. And just like with travel planning, it's always better to be over-prepared than under-prepared when it comes to import regulations.
Okay, so we've covered all 7 essential documents for navigating logistics legalities in Vietnam. Might seem like a lot to keep track of, but the good news is once you understand what each document is for and what those potential pitfalls are, the whole process becomes a lot less intimidating.
Exactly right. It's about being organized, doing your homework, and having the right people to guide you. Trust me, the effort you put in upfront to get these documents right, it'll pay off big time when it comes to smooth customs clearance and getting your goods delivered on time.
Absolutely. Now that we've got the basics down, let's dive into some more specific tips and strategies for making sure your Vietnamese import-export journey is a success.
Sounds good to me. Let's get into it.
Okay, so we've walked through all 7 documents, but I'm curious, from your experience, are there any practical tips you can share for making sure this whole process actually goes smoothly? Because it still feels like a lot to juggle.
Yeah, for sure. It's not just about having the documents, it's about having them right. And one mistake I see pretty often is people waiting till the last minute. A lot of these certificates, they have processing times, so start early.
Right. Yeah, rushing always leads to errors. What about the actual content of the documents? Any tips there?
Absolutely. Be meticulous, use clear, concise language. Avoid any kind of jargon that a customs official might not understand. I actually once saw a shipment delayed because the packing list described a product using a super technical term. It took forever to sort out.
Wow, so even if it's technically correct, if it's not easily understood, it can still cause problems. It's almost like translating a document. You got to make sure the meaning is clear in the receiving country's context.
That's a great point. And building on that idea of consistency, make sure all your documents are telling the same story. If your commercial invoice says one thing and the packing list says another, that's going to raise red flags.
Right. It's like telling one story to immigration and another to customs. Your story, or in this case, your shipment story, needs to be clear and consistent across all the documents.
Exactly. Another tip, leverage technology. Vietnam's e-customs system has really streamlined things, so get familiar with the platform, make sure you have all the right logins, digital signatures, and take advantage of any of the online resources or tutorials they offer.
So it's like online banking. Once you get used to it, it's so much more efficient than doing everything manually.
Exactly. And speaking of efficiency, having a good logistics partner, a freight forwarder, someone like that, they can be invaluable. They have the expertise, the experience to guide you through the whole process, handle the paperwork, and troubleshoot any issues that come up.
It's like having a local guide when you're traveling, right? They know the best routes, they speak the language, they can help you navigate any of those unexpected challenges.
Yeah, perfect analogy. A good logistics partner is your eyes and ears on the ground in Vietnam, making sure your shipments move smoothly and efficiently.
Awesome. So to recap our key takeaways, start early, be accurate, be consistent, leverage technology, and seriously consider working with a logistics partner. It sounds like, with a little planning and preparation, navigating these 7 documents doesn't have to be a nightmare.
You got it. It's all about understanding the system, being proactive, and having the right support. And remember, these documents, they're not just bureaucratic hoops to jump through. They're really essential for safe, legal, and efficient trade.
I love that. This deep dive has been super helpful for me.
Why?
Really understanding the importance of these documents. It's not just about checking boxes. It's about the bigger picture.
Absolutely. And to anyone listening who's thinking about sourcing from or shipping to Vietnam, I say to do your research, connect with experienced professionals. Don't be afraid to ask questions. The more you know, the more confident and successful you'll be.
Great advice. And for even more resources, make sure to check out the Vietnam Direct Sourcing website. They've got tons of information to help you navigate all the ins and outs of doing business in Vietnam.
Definitely. Knowledge is power, especially in the world of international trade.
Couldn't agree more. All right, that wraps up another deep dive. Thanks for joining us on this journey through the world of Vietnamese logistics legalities. We hope you found it informative and insightful.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Until next time, keep learning, keep exploring, and keep diving deep.